Hi, this is Chris Pells. In this video we're going to learn how to do validation in ASP.NET. So let's get started by building a new website. We'll just call this website VB. Now I've created a sample page layout for us to do validation on ahead of time. So let me get that and copy and paste that into our page. And as you will see, this is just the layout of the page. It's nothing to do with the validation. So what we have on the page are some typical user input controls, and we'll see how to add validation to them. So to get started, let's look at the validation controls that are available in ASP.NET. And there's several standard controls. We have a required field validator, a range, regular expression, compare, custom, and a validation summary. And we'll go into each of those in more detail as we put them on the page and implement them. So let's get started doing some validation. The first validation control that we're going to add to the page is called the validation summary. And we'll put that down here below the login button. And this control doesn't actually do any validation, but what it does provide is a common place where you can display error messages from the other validation controls that are located on your page. Let me open up the properties window on the right side, because we'll be setting a number of properties on these controls. What we're going to do with our validation summary is we're going to use this as a place where we can provide a list to the user of all the fields on the page that have some sort of error that they need to go back and correct. We'll type in a standard header here that'll be displayed with the summary control, and we'll say you must enter a valid value in the following fields. And we're going to give this a CSS class. I made up a small style sheet inside of the page just to give you an example of how you might use a style to make your messages stand out a little bit. And that's called validation message. One of the properties of the validation summary control that we're going to leave in its default setting, which is bulleted list, is called the display mode. And what the display mode does is allows you to format the multiple messages in your summary in different formats. Now let's add our first validation control to the page. And the first one we'll add is called the required field validator, and this does as the name implies. It requires that the user enter a value in the field. So we'll take this and let's require that the user enter a last name. So now we have to set several properties in order to have this validate the last name text box on our page. First, what I would like to do is just put in the CSS class, again, validation message. And then a very important property is which control is the required field validator associated with. And in this case, we're going to select the last name. Next, what we need to do is determine what we want for an error message. And there's an important distinction here between error message and the text property. The error message property is the text that's displayed down here in the validation summary control, whereas the text is displayed immediately where the validator is located on the page if the validation fails. So what we're going to do in the error message is put last name, because remember in our summary control we have a bulleted list of all the fields that have something invalid. So when last name is not entered, what we're going to get down here in the list is last name, so the user has an indication they have to go up here to last name and in this case enter some information. And then down there for text, what we're going to use is just a capital R, so there's a visual indicator to the right of the last name text box to the user if validation fails that they need to do something. on last name. So that's all we have to do to get a required field validator to work on the page with last name. Let me just start up the page and we'll take a quick look at this in action so you get a perspective on how it works before we do the rest of the validators. So here we have our page. I will leave last name blank. I'll click login and you see we get both the last name listed with our validation summary at the bottom as well as the text value, in this case a capital R, indicating to the user that they need to do something with last name. So let me just put Smith in here and we'll click login again, and this time you see validation passes, so we get neither the validation summary display nor the text for the validator to the right of last name. So now let's go on and add some additional validation controls to the page. Let's say the next thing we want to validate on our input page is postal code. And what we want to do is to make sure that the user has entered 5 characters that are all digits. In order to do this, we're going to use the regular expression validator. And this is a very flexible and powerful validator that I found useful in quite a number of places. So we'll take regular expression control and we'll put it out to the right of postal code. Like our required validator, the first thing we need to do is indicate what control we want to validate with the regular expression validator. And we want to do postal code. Let's put our validation message class here so we get the look that we want. Next, we want to go down to the error message. And remember, this displays down the validation summary, so we'll put postal code. Then our text to display to the right of the postal code text box is postal code must be 5 numeric digits. Next we enter our validation expression, and this is the regular expression which you want evaluated to validate the contents of the control. And you have 2 approaches. One is there's several predefined regular expressions that you can use, or you can type in a custom regular expression. And we happen to have one for the US zip code, so we'll use that. So now we're ready to test the postal code validation. So we'll start up the page and we'll click login, and we get our required for last name, but the regular expression is not a required validator. It's just checking the contents of what we type, so we don't get any errors because we haven't typed anything in postal code. So we'll just type Smith in our last name, and let's put ABC, and this should break the validation or make it invalid. Try that, and indeed it does. We get the message that the postal code must be 5 numeric digits. We also see that the postal code is listed in the validation summary as one of the fields that needs to be corrected. So now I'll just put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Log in again. It passes validation, so we don't get either of our messages. Now let's do some validation on the phone number field. And what we want to do for phone number is actually perform 2 validations. One, we want it to be required, and then second, we want the phone number to be in the correct format. So we're going to use our required field validator, and we're going to use a regular expression validator. So this shows you that you can actually perform multiple validations on a single control on the page. So we'll go to our required field validator, control to validate, phone number, class, validation message. Our message is phone, is the invalid field. The text we want to use, again, we use capital R. Then for our regular expression, control to validate, is also the phone. Set up our formatting. The error message we want displayed in the summary is the phone field. The text we want to display out to the right is phone must be in the format area code space prefix suffix. Now for the validation expression, we'll see there is a US phone number, but what we're going to do is actually, I'm going to paste in a custom validation that I made up ahead of time for our phone